Please be seated. The court is now back in session. Before I once again hand the floor to the lead co-lawyers for civil parties to put more questions to this civil party, I'd like to give the floor to Judge Lavange to clarify the matters arising this morning. Judge Lavange, please take the floor.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to remind the civil party lead co-lawyers and all parties that the witnesses or civil parties who will be testifying before this chamber have to focus on facts that are the basis for case 002/01. Consequently, regarding the witness in the dock today, his testimony has to focus essentially on facts relating to the evacuation of Phnom Penh, that is forced transfer number 1. And other facts included are killings of officers of the Khmer Republic, whether that is during the evacuation of Phnom Penh or upon the arrival of the evacuees. So some facts that have been referred to by the witness fall within the framework of this trial. Beyond that, we should recall that forcible movements number 2 concern movements during 1975, 1976, and 1977, but they do not concern population movements that occurred during 1978. These movements of peoples from the east zone towards other zones in Cambodia are part of the transfer number 3. So strictly speaking, we do not envisage examining the witness or civil parties on these facts. However, the chamber has made a distinction between witnesses and civil parties, and the chamber has admitted that civil parties may speak to sufferings they endured, and in this regard, they have been given some flexibility and latitude so they can speak about facts that are part of the first trial segment, but other facts, taking into account the limits and exceptions made, and the expression of suffering should be concise and should not be excessive. I hope that this clarifies the scope of examination of this civil party. And now I give the floor to the civil party lead co-lawyer.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors, everyone in and around the courtroom. I may not understand fully what has been clarified by Judge Lavange. Your Honor said that the killings of the former regimes at the location where the civil party arrived. My question is, when the civilians arrived at a certain point, and then those people were persecuted because they were considered new people, could these facts be put into a form of questions either through the civil parties or through any of the witnesses of the court?
Now, if we strictly limit ourselves to to the evidence concerning 002, I think we'll find the facts in the annex following the severance. We have amended a number of facts since then. Now, to answer your question clearly regarding killings of persons because of their status as officers of the Khmer Republic, this is provided for in paragraph 1317 in the closing order, and that is why I say that this category doesn't pose any problem. However, regarding civil parties, I think that they can speak about their sufferings with regard to the consequences that they may have endured on account of the evacuation of Phnom Penh, for instance. Provided would not go into too many details, it is possible that a civil party may say he or she suffered on account of work that he or she had to do. But again, this should be done in a succinct manner, in a concise manner, and we shouldn't go into too many details.
But I heard on the headset of what Your Honor said, both in Khmer and the French language. You talked about the killing of the military officers as stated in a paragraph of the closing order. And as for other victims who were the new people, it was mentioned in paragraph 274 of the closing order that is regarding the arrival of the new people, the questioning of the biography at the destination, as well as the placing those new people in the cooperatives. This is particularly related to the second phase. Can we also touch upon these facts as stated in the closing order?
Je n'ai pas compris, mais...
I have not understood, but maybe I'm wrong. I didn't understand that the presence of civil parties was concerned by movement number 2 or transfer number 2. I think they were concerned mainly by the transfer number 1. So I do not think the reference to paragraph 274 is appropriate. But again, the chamber is not opposed to having civil parties talk about the consequences of the evacuations of Phnom Penh. The only condition is that we should be concise.
President Council Michael Canavas, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. I'll be very brief because I seem to be somewhat confused as well. It would appear that the civil parties wish at times to treat the lawyers for the civil parties, that is, to treat civil parties as fact witnesses and at other times as civil parties. So as fact witnesses, of course, they get to testify not being under oath, but yet get all the facts that are unrelated to them being civil parties, and then treat them as civil parties when it comes to their particular situation. And I think that's what was mentioned earlier this morning, at least that was my understanding from the Noon Chia team. And so we do need some clarification, and the parameters should be, if civil parties, in my estimation, civil parties should be talking about their particular circumstances and not in general about facts. Otherwise, they're fact witnesses. They should be placed under oath and treated as such. Thank you.
President Judge Levenge, please take the floor.
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Very briefly, to respond to Counsel Carnavas, perhaps he could liaise with counsel who are more familiar with the civil law system. But a civil party testifies on facts or to facts and sheds light before the chamber on any suffering he or she may have endured. So a civil party may do both. It is difficult to say that at this point in time it will be factual evidence and at another time it will be suffering, because some facts are linked to suffering. So we cannot split what the civil party has to say between facts and suffering. So a civil party can testify both to facts and suffering.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Isn't that what we just did with the previous civil party? Didn't he or she testify to facts and then testify to suffering? Isn't that what just happened? And I'm speaking to you, Judge Laverne. I'm not trying to be critical, but you just said we can't separate the two issues. But isn't that in fact exactly what we did with the previous civil party? We had an exchange, an examination as to facts, and then we had a recitation this morning, in fact, on the sole issue of suffering. So I don't mean to be difficult, but that has actually made it a bit more confusing for me now. So perhaps you could clarify that for me.
Si je peux me permettre, je dirais que
With your leave, I would say that the chamber would like us to stop wasting time. The civil parties may express themselves on their sufferings at a point A or point B. I don't think it is very important. What is important is that they be authorized to do so. And whether questions will make the distinction between facts and suffering is not really important. But we want to avoid a situation in which the civil party will dwell at length on the sufferings or the facts so that we avoid difficulties.
Thank you, Judge Laverne. That's clear now. I just raised that point because my colleague was chastised this morning for making an intervention at what was deemed by the President an inopportune time. So again, I'm just trying to get it straight so that we know exactly what's happening, what we're allowed to do, and when we're allowed to do it. Because my colleague, Major Sonarun, stood up this morning and attempted to make an intervention, and he was chastised by the President for not paying attention, not liaising with International Council as to what happened on Friday. So again, for me, as always for us, it's a matter of clarity. We just want to know what's happening in this courtroom, when we are allowed to participate, how we're supposed to participate, that kind of a thing. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to have it clear in my mind. Thank you.
Judge Laverne, please take the floor.
je pensais.
I thought I was clear enough, but it appears that that is not the case. I think that you may ask questions after the civil parties. So I think you can ask questions on everything that transpires during the examination. There's no problem with that. But again, if we are talking of points that are purely related to suffering, that would not necessarily be pertinent. So I think we should reserve that for the period after the examination in chief.
President. Lawyer for civil parties, you may continue your questions. Tisrina, thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to continue my questioning of the civil party. This morning, you stated that some facts related to your uncle upon his arrival at his native village that he was arrested. My question is the following. What happened to him initially when he arrived at his native village? Response. I had two uncles by the name of Mi and Son. I did not know much about Uncle Son, but as for Uncle Mi, I knew some facts. Both of them had been arrested before my arrival. Uncle Mi had been arrested and put in the detention facility to the south of the village. And when he was let out to work, he was one of the many prisoners who were forced to work in the rice field. So he was detained at the security center at the Samraung village. He was forced to dig the earth and to pull the plow. And he was actually used as in place of a cow to pull the plow. That's what I saw from a distance when he was working in the rice field to the south of the village. Question. Allow me to clarify. He was used to plow in place of a cow. Is it to plow the rice field? Response. One day, he was walked by the Onka to pull the plow from the Samraung village to my village, which was the Kadai village. So he was used to gather the firewood as well. I saw him both when he left and when he returned as he walked past in front of my house. He was carrying the yoke of the ox cart, and another prisoner was used on the other side of the yoke, and there was another prisoner pushing the cart, and they were monitored by militia. Question. Did you know the reason for his arrest? Response. Like my father, he had a connection with the Tribunal regime as he was a military officer. In fact, he had stayed in the liberated zone for 2 years, and he was being tracked down and arrested, so he fled with my father. And upon his arrival in the village, they already knew about his background, and for that reason he was arrested. Question. You said your uncle's case was similar to that of your father's. My question is, what happened to your father? Response. As I stated this morning, upon arrival at his native village, my father had to do the work as instructed by Onka. He worked for 10 days, and on the last day he was taken for re-education. I did not know about that. Only later, when I returned from my work, I was told that he was taken for re-education. So he disappeared. And later on, I learned that because of his connection as a military officer, he was tempered and forced to work hard in a security center in Trapang Lektbal to the east of my Kadai village. First, he was put in Bachi Pagoda. I was informed of that by the best person. So those people who had a connection with the previous colonial regime, including military officers, agents or intelligence officers or high-ranking officers, were put in that pagoda. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter that pagoda, and they were shackled in that pagoda, and later on they were led to another village. Question: upon hearing that your father was arrested and shackled in the security center and tortured, what was your feeling back then? And how about your mother? What was her feeling like? Response: as a son who used to live with my father, and that when he left without saying goodbye, I felt shocked and missed him very much. When I heard that he was at Trapang Lektbal village, besides working in the vicinity nearby, I tried to see him through the bamboo trees, but I could not see him. I really missed him very much, and I shed my tear. And I also had a very pity on my mother. I understand that she did not speak anything, but she was very, very sad. At that time, we knew that whatever came out of our mouths would be reach the ears of Angka, and we would be arrested. So we dare not speak about anything. When someone was taken for re-education, it means that person would be taken away. And we only learned of that from the best people who lied to us and who told us secretly about that. Even today, when I think of him, I feel very sad. President. Mr. Chum Sukha, would you like to take a short break, or you can continue? Civil Party. It's okay, Mr. President. I'll recompose myself. Even at the present day, when there is a ceremony or a religious celebration, I think of him and of the fact that he just lost, that we all lost him. In fact, we wanted to do anything as well as we could survive the regime. Council, may I put more questions to you? Council, let me return to your case. Upon your arrival at the native village, what were you asked to do? Response. Upon my arrival, I was placed in the cooperative and that I had to work on a daily basis. It started from 7 a.m. in the morning to the canal to build a dam to the west of the village. And sometimes I was asked to cut the palm tree leaves to work the rice fields. I did all kinds of work I was asked to do. And I was asked also to make fertilizer, that is natural fertilizer and the fertilizer from human feces. In the morning, I was asked to carry the urine and the feces from each house in order to make fertilizer. At that time, during the Khmer Rouge regime, we were instructed by Onka to save the urine and the feces during the night in order to be collected in the morning to make fertilizer. So I carried those feces and urine every morning. And if there was no feces in a bucket of that particular house, that person would be criticized because they needed it to make fertilizer. And as you know, fresh feces really stink. And sometimes we were asked to dig up old feces as well in order to decompose it to make fertilizer. The 17 April people and one of the best people who was rather retarded was asked to work with me to carry the feces, and because the feces was stunk too much, we used a handkerchief or scarf to block our nose, and we were criticized by that. They scolded us and they used us as animals during the time. And in the evening, when we mixed the feces, then we had to dry it, and then we had to collect it again by hand. And when we had to use it in a rice field, we had to use our hand to spread that natural fertilizer as well. One time when I contracted malaria, I was still used to go and transport wood from Cambodia. The cat capsized a few times, and I was still under the influence of malaria, and I did not have any medicine to take. I used herbal medicine to treat malaria. As for the medic, President, the International Defense Council for Noon Chia, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know I'm going to be presented as the bad guy here. I'm trying very hard to keep us within the bounds of relevance. And just let me say to you, Mr. Civil Party, I'm very sorry that these things that you're relating now happen to you. As you say, they have. We are well within an area now, and we have been for the last 10 minutes, of forced labor. Forced labor is not part of this trial. Now, let me just try and make a point.
The President, could you please be more precise on any particular question or portion of the question you take issue with? Because you are not here, you are not supposed to give any instruction to the civil party before the chamber. You may address any particular portion of the question or question itself that you object, and the chamber believe that by that we will be able to rule upon such objection. And please be reminded that no party in this proceeding is entitled to have the floor to instruct any civil party giving testimony before the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just correct the record. I was simply I was simply framing my comments, and I did address the civil party. I just wanted him to know that I wasn't interrupting his testimony without grounds. So let me just clarify that. I was not instructing him. I was not instructing him in any way. I would never do that. I'm making an objection, and the objection is based on relevance. What we have in this trial, as Judge Laverne has just told us, is a crime base about forced evacuation from Phnom Penh to certain locations. And Judge Laverne also told us that we would be able to explore what happened immediately to people upon arrival in those locations. For example, were they targeted because they were former members of the Lon Nol regime? Now, what those people then did for days, weeks, months after that, it's not relevant. That's forced labor. Forced labor is not part of this trial. And again, let me try and make a point. Civil parties, as we're reminded very often, are parties. That means they have a relationship with their counsel. So just as we are directed to focus our submissions, focus our clients, focus our presentations in court, the civil party lawyers should be equally instructed to focus their clients. So as I understand it, the gentleman sitting here is a client of somebody across the stage there. So they have a relationship, and that should be clear. We're well outside the scope of the evacuation of Phnom Penh now. This is why I raised the point earlier. And again, Mr. Civil Party, I apologize for interrupting your testimony.
The President, counsel for the civil party, would you wish to respond to the objection by counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea? Counsel T. Srina. Thank you, Mr. President. I may wish to respond briefly to the objection by counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea. If I'm not mistaken, I remember clearly that Judge Laverne already ruled clearly that the questions are relevant to the evacuation for first phase and second phase, and that civil party counsel shall also be putting relevant question to the civil party. Civil party has a different status than a witness, and civil party before us today experienced the event of the evacuation, and my questions were not very detailed or specific. I was just asking him about what happened to him after he had been evacuated to a location that he did not want to be placed. So these events are interrelated. With that, I do not understand why Council took issue with that. I do not know whether he misunderstood my position, or perhaps the ruling by Judge Lavagne was not well taken. So I would like to ask the Chamber, in particular Mr. President, to see whether I may proceed with the further questions. The President. A response has already been made, and Counsel for Nuon Chea already made appropriate observation. With that, we would like to ask that Counsel for the civil parties to limit the questions to a specific period of time, and that the question should not be straying away from this period. Otherwise, we would be now discussing about the facts that are covering all the entire period of democratic Cambodia. And the Chamber understands that the period of evacuation, or people who were in different locations could be there in different period of time. Some could have been there for a few weeks. Some would have to travel several days before they reached the destination of the evacuation. The destination. So civil party is now testifying about the evacuation, which is part of the third phase from the southwest. So what the Chamber wants from Council is more about making precise questions with regard to the scope of this period of time. Council. Thank you, Mr. President. I may have to go back a little bit with my next question to you. It is about what happened during the early days when the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh. My question is, where did you live at that time? Do you still remember where you were? Response. I lived at Po Chantong, but the fightings were fierce. The Khmer Rouge attacked the location. In light of that, my family decided to relocate to Borei Kaila location. It was a kind of camp where people could take refuge. So we were there at Borei Kaila. Question. Could you describe to us what you saw happening at Borei Kaila? Response. At Borei Kaila, I already indicated earlier on, I worked as a lone soldier. On the eve of 16th of April, we went into Phnom Penh and I went to my parents' home. And on the morning of April, 17 April, at about 7 a.m., I walked to a hospital and my parents' hat was there. It was a military hospital, the hospital for treating sick patients, and it was also a volleyball court, and it is now the TV5 station. And I saw wounded people and medics who were busy treating people. The injured people were those soldiers who were Khmer Rouge soldiers and also the Lon Nol soldiers. I saw 2 Khmer Rouge soldiers who got injured. Their arms and legs were severely injured, and I walked there and I asked what kind of medicine. Rather, I noted that one of the injured Khmer Rouge soldiers asked the medic what kind of medicine he would be prescribed or offered. Then the medic said that the medicine belonged to the American medicine, and although he was severely injured, he denied receiving such medicine because he believed that the medicine belonged to the imperialists, and he would not be treated with such medicines no matter what. And I also witnessed more wounded people coming into the hospital. At about 9 a.m., the Khmer Rouge troop fully covered or captured Phnom Penh. And after a while, I also walked back to the hospital. By then, there was no medic left except those dying patients. And the Khmer Rouge injured soldiers were nowhere to be found again. So the patients were left unattended and left to die. Thank you. Counsel. When the Khmer Rouge arrived, was there any attention or medical attention being offered to the remaining patients or wounded people? Response. As stated, in the morning when I was at the hospital, I saw the former Lon Nol medics treating patients. But when the Khmer Rouge troops came, no medics left except the dying patients or seriously injured patients and some bodies lying there in the hospital ward. Question. Did the Khmer Rouge soldiers offer medical assistance to the patients at the hospital? Response. No, they didn't. There was no Khmer Rouge medic being seen at the hospital. It was left with only the patients. Counsel Tisrina, I have only a few last questions to put to you. Having lived through the Democratic Cambodia regime, or I would like to rephrase the question in other words, when you arrived your hometown, what happened to you? Response. Upon arriving my hometown in Bong Kday village, Angka made me work digging canals, doing farmings, plowing the paddy fields. And the most difficult time I remember was when I fell seriously ill. I couldn't sit up for several months, and I was offered only 2 meals of very thin porridge, rice porridge a day, and I was not offered any proper medicine except the kind of medicines that was normally known as the rabbit pellets. And for the injection, they gave me some kind of injection from a kind of liquid in a bottle. I was very hungry and very sick, and I also had to work. I worked until 10 p.m. every day. So I could say that I had to work more than 12 hours a day. Counsel, I have a final question to you. Have you ever heard of any person, for example, including Pol Pot, Ieng Sary, Nuon Chea, Khieu Samphan? Response. I have heard of their names, and I used to see them as well, because at the village, a loudspeaker would be hoisted on the top of the tamarind tree, and we could hear radio broadcasts, the broadcast about the political line, the party's lines, and the composition of the National Assembly would be also broadcast on the radio. And we heard Pol Pot worked as the secretary of the party, and we heard the names of other ministers of various ministries, including the names of Mr. Khieu Samphan, Ieng Sary, and Nuon Chea. And we also noted that by 1978, the names of Pol Pot, Ieng Sary, Nuon Chea were written on the leaflets distributed from the air by an airplane. And these leaflets were about the National Liberation Fronts, and they were talking about the genocide clique like Pol Pot, like Khieu Samphan, and these individuals. Counsel, thank you very much, Mr. Sivopati. I have no more question, but I would like to have a request to be put before the chamber. The civil party has written a diary, the diary that he wrote into 3 parts. The diary has already been placed into the case file. may I humbly ask that the chamber refer to the book or the diary under the 22/110.1. The President, Council Tisina, could you please repeat the ERN number? This document, which is the diary of the civil party, part 1, is under ERN 00359558 through 00359683. Part 2, under ERN D22/110.2, ERN 00359684 through 0035969810. The Part 3 is under D22/110.3, under ERN 00359811 through 00359880. I apologize that I have not yet located the English and French versions of the document, but with this may I ask that the document be translated into these two languages for court reference. The book he wrote gives more detailed information about his accounts than what he is saying in the court, and due to the fact that the segments of the trial are separated, we note that he is not able to deliberately or to give more details than what he has written in his like what he has written in his diary. And I have no more questions, and I thank you very much indeed, Your Honors. I would like to now cede the floor to my colleague, the President, Counsel Simonov. You may now proceed.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few questions to follow up on what was already put to this gentleman. Sir, you said that you were asked to leave Phnom Penh because the city was going to be bombed. You also said that you would be back 3 days later. Now, clearly you did not come back, and you stayed in a village. But were you told why you were not going to come back to Phnom Penh?
Response. First, Angkar asked us to leave Phnom Penh for 3 days, factually. But midway, my grandparents asked Angkar when we would be allowed to be back, and the response was that after 7 days then we would be allowed to be back after the enemies had been cleared. But the next 7 days the same question was asked, but then we were not returned to the city but allowed to go to our villages. So the 3 days they promised became 3 years, 8 months and 20 days. And we could never contest. We could never seek further clarification on that. We just listened to their orders and we kept moving from one location to another. And when we reached our village, we knew that the plan was not that people had to be evacuated because we were to be bombed. In fact, we were called to leave the city to help do farming. According to the Angkar's plan, the 3 tons per hectare production plan.
Thank you. Just a minute ago, you were talking about the base people, and you used that particular term, base people, but what exactly do you mean by the term?
Response. The base people refers to those people who had lived in the liberated zones since the war between 1970 to 1975.
And you, who were transferred from Phnom Penh, what term was used to describe you?
Response. People who were evacuated from Phnom Penh were considered the displaced people or the evacuees or the 17 April people.
Merci.
Thank you. Was there any difference in the way the 17th of April people were treated compared to the base people?
There was a difference between the base people and the 17 April people for the period between 1975 to 1978. There was a complete difference between these two. 17 April people were those who were evacuated from various towns and cities, namely Phnom Penh or the provincial town of Prey Veng or from Net Leung. The 17 April people usually arrived at the destination with their bare hands, so they had to go to the forest to cut the tree or bamboo to build houses. As for the rice ration, the base people were allowed to keep the rice or unhusked rice at their house, but the 17 April people were not allowed to keep the rice at where they stayed. Also, there was a restriction on speech. Base people could speak about the devotion of Angkar, but the 17 April people were not allowed to do so, and they were not allowed to speak about any folk tales or to mention the king or to say anything regarding the imperialist. If we were heard talking about that, then we would be criticized and we would be monitored by the base people. And there were various groups, including the militia and the female groups, who would monitor our activities, whether we worked hard, whether we sacrificed personal belongings or property. It means that we had to sacrifice everything. We had to get rid of all the property, and we should only have a very minimum clothing with us, just a set of clothing, a blanket, and just 1 or 2 utensils, including an old cooking pot or a small bowl or a spoon. But best people will be able to use better utilities. Also, there was a restriction on movement. Best people could walk rather freely, but for best people, we could not walk or go across to another village without the authority from Angkar. And if we wanted, we had to secretly walk to another village during the break, for instance.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much for giving us those details, sir, and those precise explanations. Can I ask you if Angkar explained its policies to you, what exactly they were planning, and were there meetings at which all of this was explained to you?
Every evening there had to be a meeting, a group meeting, as instructed by Angkar. It was called a livelihood meeting where we criticize or self-criticize one another and whether we achieved the quota set by Angkar, and if we did not finish the quota, what was the reason for the failure, and that we had to commit ourselves to the plan set forth by Angkar. We would be criticized on the spot if we failed to adhere to the plans by Angkar. We would be alleged of not allowing Angkar or to interfere with the historical will of Angkar. And if we put our hand or leg into such historical will, it would be broken. For instance, if there is a bucket of rice, it would still be called a bucket of rice if one or two grains is lost or dispensed. So we had to work very hard in order to achieve the quota of 3 tons per hectare rice production. We had to build dams for water irrigation into the rice field. So we had to love Angkar. Absolutely. President, you may proceed the council.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record today, but this is very much what I'm concerned about. Perhaps if the question would have been placed in time, because I have no idea whether the lengthy answer the witness just gave related to his time on the road between Phnom Penh and his arrival at his village, or the time from his arrival going forward to a certain period. There was no framing of the question in time. So we did hear something about rice production, we did hear something about dam building, we heard quite a bit in that answer. So perhaps, again, if the questions could be framed precisely so we know if we're talking about prior to the evacuation, en route, or immediately afterward, immediately upon arrival, which I accept is, as you've said, within. But after that, again, we're getting outside the scope of the trial.
President, the lead co-lawyer for civil party, if you wish to respond to the objection raised by the defense counsel, you may proceed.
Mr. President, all I would say is that it is obvious that the witness was talking about the time when he left the village after the forced transfer. So our question is to know the objectives of the transfer and what happened after the forced transfer. I have no further questions, Mr. President. I thank you also for giving me the floor. This civil party has shed light on the matters before this chamber.
The International Defense Council for Nuon Chea, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, we're working with a record. So in terms of what's obvious and what's not obvious, I think it needs to be said. So we need dates, we need time frames. That's what we're dealing with. It wasn't at all obvious to me. So again, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm talking about precision and rigor and something that when we go back to look at the record, when it comes time to make final submission, when it comes time for your honors to assess this material, nobody's going to say 18 months from now, 2 years from now, oh, it's obvious. It's not on the record.
President, the Chamber would like to inquire with the prosecution as how much time you need to put the questions to this civil party. Mr. President, the prosecution needs only 30 to 40 minutes to put questions to this civil party. President, thank you. The time is now appropriate for a short break. We will take a 20-minute break and return at 3 p.m.
សូមក្រោកឈរ